Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Mr. Doherty. How are you doing?
Thank you, Chika. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing very well.
Great to have you with us this morning, sir. So let's just dive straight into it with what I guess is a question that everyone asks all the time. Mm-hmm. Why do you want to be governor?
Thank you. And again, thanks for having me. The decision to run for the governorship office in Lagos, for me, is driven by a firm belief that Lagos is a far cry from where it could be as a city. I think Lagos is a city that has tremendous potential. It has tremendous resources. It's a city that's been a commercial capital, commercial center for centuries, actually. And when you look at Lagos today in relation to where it could be, and you measure it by the tangible things by which you might measure a city, quality of life of the citizens, the dignity and the respect with which citizens live their lives, the ability to generate livelihoods, all of these factors, whether you look at infrastructure, transportation, the fact that they're spending so much time in traffic, education, health, all of these measures of quality of life, you see that Lagos is a far cry from where it could be. And I think that at the root of that is governance. And the only way you get to good governance in a democracy is if people who have capacity and character and the right intention step up, and if the people support them into office. And we believe, and I believe firmly, that the way we get to where we want to go is if not just me, but people like me step up and the people support us into office, and we get to better governance, and ultimately we can then deliver quality of life for the citizens. I will just give you one, in evidence of what I'm saying, I will just give you one statistic, which is that if you look at the Economist Intelligence Unit rankings of livability, which measures the quality of life of citizens, you see that Lagos has been ranked about the bottom of that list consistently. So in the one that was released a few months ago, Lagos was ranked 171 out of 172. And this is on quality of life dimension. So I think the evidence is clear.
Right.
And this is why I and others like me have stepped up.
Yeah, and you grew up in Lagos. You spent a better part of your years here in Lagos, and I want to get your thoughts on, what you think has been, in terms of the leadership, right? What you think has been missing about it that has led to the gradual but constant decay of, life and quality of life here in Lagos.
So, I think what is most missing in the case of Lagos is leadership that acts in the interests of the people. What we have had generally is a self-interested leadership in Lagos, which has not been driven by the needs and the interests of the people. And what that does over time is that it detracts from the programs that ought to be implemented, and brings focus on those in which those in authority have interest. And over time, what then happens is that you create a very unequal society where the wealth of the society is concentrated in a few pockets, and then the vast majority of people become impoverished over time. And that's been the tragedy of Lagos, actually, because the present ruling party has run Lagos for 25 years. And at the end of that 25-year period, you see that inequality has only increased and increased tremendously. We interact with people on the streets, in the markets, on a day-to-day basis. Just yesterday, I was on Lagos mainland, I was in Oyingbo, I was in Sabo, we interacted with all the people. And it is clear that the people are crying out. They see that the actions of government, the actions of leadership, are divorced from their own interests. And they feel it when they spend 6 hours in traffic. They feel it when they cannot send their children to public schools with confidence. They feel it when they cannot go to public hospitals with confidence and they would rather go to traditional medical practitioners. They see it when they have to face high transport fares from their meager earnings because of the activities of agberos, who, I might add, in Lagos, are part of the power structure. And I can talk more about that if you want me to.
Mr. Doherty, if I may. First of all, I mean, it's factually incorrect to say that the present ruling governing party has been here for 25 years. I understand what you do mean, right? The presence behind successive administrations for 25 years has been the same. But I do have to ask, leadership at the very top tends to get a lot of flack because you can't be everywhere at once, right? And this would lead to the question of why being governor is the way that you would want to institute some of the changes that you want to, as opposed to, I don't know, maybe a philanthropist, pardon me, or being a part of possibly previous administrations, right, to be productive in civil service or public service or the other. So what are your thoughts on this? Why is it governor and not some other way of implementing change?
Okay, thank you. Yes, while it's factually the case that we have had several governorships, I think there's facts and there's truth, right? And in truth, the control of Lagos has remained the same for 23 years. I think that is incontrovertible. Now, beyond that, why government, why governor? You see, what causes things to change is when in sort of building on the point you're making, where change emanates from is the top, right? So you've not had a shortage of people who have been do-gooders or who have had good intentions, people in civil society, even people who have taken appointive positions in government. Because they go in there, they work very hard for 4 years. They may accomplish certain things and they leave. But what changes things is when you change the institutional environment of government, when you change the values, when you change the cultures, right? When you change the attitudes. And you do that by leading by example, and it starts at the very top. And so for me, when I asked myself, which office is appropriate? To me, I believe where you have the impact, where you have the possibility of having the greatest impact is in the seat of governor. And this is so it's a thought out process actually, and not a random decision.
Right. So I do see what is your plan of action or the key areas you want to focus on if you're elected, right? And perhaps I would like to talk about your tax reform plans, particularly because you know what Lagos is as far as money goes, right? And Nigerians generally they complain about taxing, and the experts say that we are undertaxed. What are your plans for Lagos, juggling these two perceptions?
So my overall view and theme, and this forms part of our central tax reform agenda, which is part of our Tiger agenda for Lagos. The T is for tax reform. First of all, you have to have equity in the tax system. In other words, it's not so much whether taxes are high or low, it's whether people are paying commensurate taxes with what they should pay. So we should have those who earn the most, pay the most, and we have those who earn the least should bear a lower burden of tax. And one of the problems we have in Lagos is the fact that the implementation of the tax system across the spectrum, the socioeconomic spectrum, is not necessarily fair, right? So you have people who are on payee systems. They have low incomes, but because they're in payee systems, those taxes are deducted at source. You also have people who earn very high incomes, but they're earned maybe either in business environments or informal environments, and therefore they do not bear that burden of tax. So tax should be equitable on the first as a first point. Then secondly, the operation of the tax system itself should be a system that operates with transparency, with accountability in the interest of the people. We have a system in Lagos where you have a private sector entity that's been given a responsibility, a dubious responsibility if you ask me, to monitor the taxes and keep a share of the revenue, the tax revenue for that service. Now, we think this is unconscionable because that share that they're keeping is part of the people's money. And this is a private sector company. It's a closely held company. There's no transparency around it. And so we will unwind that structure. If you even look at it, the work that is being done to pursue the taxes, to ensure that people pay the taxes, following up on taxpayers, etc., all of this work is done by the LIRS, which is the organ of government that deals with tax services. So the private entity that we're talking about is basically doing a record-keeping function, which it has no bearing to the structural contractual arrangement that is in place for it.
And so here's my thing. Even with collecting taxes, and there's a way in which, I mean, it's obvious that the informal sector, right, is a lot more ubiquitous than the formal sector. There are lots of them around us. And so even in taxing people, by what they should be paying, I wonder how you think of taxing the informal sector and getting what the state is due from them.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, today it's not the case that, informal sector do not pay taxes, right? So they pay taxes in a variety of ways. They may be structured ways, they may be unstructured ways. If you ask anybody who's running a small business, you find that they are visited by government agencies regularly. There are also consumption taxes, and these are other ways of taxing people other than the traditional income approach. But, with technology, with the modern tools that we have, it is not rocket science, actually, to build a tax database and ensure that it's properly implemented. And by the way, you will find that people who earn large incomes, they generally will have a tax footprint. Right? So it is possible to do it if you have the right intentions and if people are motivated correctly and compensated appropriately. Part of what you have is a situation where, and this goes to our government reform agenda, which is the G in Tiger, where you do not compensate government officials well. What will then happen is that you will see that transparency, accountability will nosedive, corruption will increase, and then those employees who should be agents of government, pursuing the interests of government and the people to collect revenues, etc., will collude with people who want to avoid doing what they should do. And the effect of that is that money that should go into government coffers then ends up in private pockets. So the way you fix that from the ground up is to ensure that your government officials, whether they be civil servants or public appointees, are well compensated for the work that they do. And then you insist that they must operate with integrity, with transparency, with accountability. And this is the heart of our government reform agenda. We will ensure that everybody who works for Lagos State government is reasonably compensated.
All right.
But we will increase the tools of enforcement, strengthen the Attorney General's office, do all of those things that enable us to ensure that those folks are there working in the interest of the people.
Right. Let's open up the phone lines here. 0913 5000 953, 0913 5000 953, and 0901 1111953. Our guest this morning is Mr. Funsho Doherty, who is the governorship candidate of the ADC. He's running to unseat the current governing structure in Lagos State at the polls come March this year. I want to also talk about infrastructure and when people talk about Lagos and the fact that it's infrastructural, composition at the moment doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the people, right? Even at basic level, and you sort of alluded to that when you discussed, the quality of life index, that you wrote out earlier, but. In response, we hear people then say that Lagos is suffering the dysfunctionality of the larger Nigerian state because everybody from other parts of the country wants to move in here, and thus it puts a lot of pressure on the infrastructure that was made for a different size, population size. I wonder what you think of the infrastructure, the population, and then the other excuse as to why it's not working for them.
So thank you, Chika. That's a good question. So here's the thing. It is true, right, that Lagos, because it has perhaps the benefit of having been a commercial capital, having so much more opportunity for livelihoods, etc., attracts folks to migrate in. But we should expect that, right? We should expect that, and we should plan for it. And I'm not saying that it is easy, but it is something that has always been the case, and it's something that we should continue to plan for. By the way, people migrating into Lagos is also potentially a source of strength, right? Because if those folks can become gainfully and productively employed, they add to the productivity and the wealth of the society. So that we should think about it not just from a sort of a distributive approach, but we should think about it also comprehensively. I would also say that when you measure Lagos objectively on the infrastructure front, you then ask yourself, how have we done relative to what we could have done? Let me take transport infrastructure, for example. One of the problems that we have is that you have had too much focus on the road infrastructure. So, as of today, we do not have a functional suburban rail transportation system, right? We understand that the Blue Line is on the verge of commencement. But here we are, well over a decade of work on that thing, and it's not been delivered, right? The waterways, we do not have a robust operation on our waterways to de-emphasize key routes on our road networks. So if we had done one or two of these, both in my opinion, and we don't see significant improvement in the traffic infrastructure, then we can say, with all we've done, we are overwhelmed. You see what I mean? But we have not delivered either of these two things, and we ought to. And we think that there's a lot more that can be done in a streamlined way to create a multimodal environment that people can operate in.
Right.
The other aspect in Lagos is that we spend a substantial portion of our revenues or of our budgets on capital expenditure. So in 2022, it was about $1 trillion out of 1.7 trillion. $1 trillion on capital expenditure. And the argument is that this is good because you're spending more on capital expenditure than on recurrent expenditure. But our argument is that, look, it depends on how you're spending your capital expenditure and what value you're getting for the capital expenditure you're spending. If you're getting 10 naira worth of value for 10 naira spent, it's good. If you're getting 2 or 3 naira for 10 naira spent, it's not good. And rather than building the wealth of the city, you will actually be impoverishing people if you do not do that. And we're saying that the transparency, accountability around public expenditures in Lagos leaves a lot to be desired.
So, Mr. Doherty, if I may, right, when you talk about infrastructure, you've touched on the road network, right? It's one of the two most notorious things that are said about Lagos. The second is actually the smell, which ties to waste, and you've outlined waste management as one of the core focuses for you. And even if we go back to road infrastructure, there's other things Lagosians will tell you. There's the it's a very negative way to describe them, but they're popularly known as agberus, that particular phenomenon. Then even with the fixing of the roads right now, traffic has become a bedeviling thing even more than is usual in the last year or so because of how the refurbishment is going on, right? And I wonder how you're going to deal with all of these things if successive administrations have not been able to.
Okay, thank you. Again, there are a couple of things. We approach it from two perspectives. First is to de-emphasize the road infrastructure, like I said, and deliver the alternative means.
If I may interrupt in that matter, because you talk about the waterways, and almost every day there's someone on Twitter that talks about how the jetties and the boats break down in the middle of the lagoon.
That is absolutely my point. So our approach is to say, look, you need to approach it as a mainstream option. Right, and part of the reason why it's not working today is because of exactly what you're saying. You have these little boats which are being run here and there, right? We have not approached it as a core mainstream option. So if we picked a couple of routes that are key routes, so if you took, for example, Ikorodu to VI, a lot of people commute on that route daily. You could have a mainstream option with substantial ferries running that service in a robust way that then delivers a large number of passengers on that route, right? So that then begins to create a waterway route. The rail, right, is evident to everybody. What we have there is a failure of project delivery because there's no reason. I mean, there was an original period that was set. Now we're well over a decade later, and there's no transparency. We don't know. One of the things that we will do, by the way, when we come in, is to open up that project and put all the information in the public domain. So that's with respect to the multimodal option. With respect to the roads, right, it's not just the...
Can we ask you to pause for a second because you have a call and someone's waiting to speak to you. Good morning. Welcome to Now Breakfast.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. What's your name?
Yeah, I'm Mr. Ola.
Mr. Ola. All right. Let's hear your question for Mr. Doherty, please.
Now, the issue of the area boys, the Agberos, what are you going to do about it? Because it's getting out of hand in Lagos State. Lagos State has turned to a thuggish state.
Yes.
Where no one can move freely.
Yes.
Without asserting. Even the people that are pushing wheelbarrow on the road were not safe. These are the people collecting money.
Yes.
Even if you are going with your car, you will be disturbed.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ola. And also, there's a question here from XMichaelXX on Twitter, who's asking, who is expected to pay for the infrastructure development if other people keep coming from other states into Lagos? Essentially because, you said we didn't plan for them earlier, so I guess it was just happening on that. So who pays for that if people keep coming in here?
Okay, thank you. So those two questions I will take, and they're good questions. The Agbero problem is central to the problem, and it related to that, to the roads I was going to get into, the question that Nabilah asked. Now, part of the problem that we have is that there is disorder and chaos on the roads. So even the roads that we have, we don't get the most value for them because, it's like if you think about, the way I say it is, if you think about an airport, right? If you think about an airport, let us take Heathrow, for example, which is an airport that has it's a very busy airport. The reason you can have that, the number of passengers that go through that airport on a daily basis is because there's organization, right? If there was disorder, there weren't lines, there weren't all of that stuff, you couldn't get maybe even a fraction of that number of people through. And it's a similar thing on the roads. We have, the R in our Tiger agenda, by the way, is rule of law and public order. And what we're saying is that there needs to be a more orderly environment on the roads. And part of that is this Agbero problem, right? Now, the Agberos, what we have to understand is that the Agberos in Lagos are a part of the power structure. And in my opinion, and in our opinion, it's going to be difficult under the existing ruling system to deal with the problem of Agberos because they are they're part of the political base, right, of the ruling party. Now, the thing to also know about them is that they operate in many ways. You can liken them to, it's a pyramidal organization, right? So you have a lot of call them foot soldiers on the roads, who we see on the roads, who create a nuisance all over the place. But they're funneling up resources up a pyramid, right? And those resources are ending up somewhere. So what you have to do is you have to go in there and have a mechanism for breaking that. The first is to, first of all, as a government, not be beholden to them because they are not the ones that elected you. So you can take action in a way that you could not take if you were dependent on them for your political.
Right. So that's not depending on them first.
Yeah. So that's the first thing.
If I may interrupt, we've got a phone call. Let's take it very quickly. Hello, good morning.
Everybody wants to talk. Everybody wants to talk.
Hi, Original Moses. Good morning. Please go ahead and ask Mr. Doherty your question.
Yeah. I agree with Mr. Doherty. He's a very likable personality.
Thank
but
you,
whether
sir.
he's electable is another thing entirely.
Well, we'll find out. We'll find out, sir.
How will you go about taxation and revenue in Lagos? Are you of the school of thought whereby you intend to widen the tax net, whereby you involve the informal sector, the artisans, and the unskilled laborers? Do you think it will work? In your opinion, will you work in that way?
All right, Moses, thank you. I think that Mr. Doherty sort of touched on that earlier because we're kind of running out of time and there's another question waiting to be answered. So maybe we should finish up with the other one on who pays for the infrastructure development. People from other states keep coming. Yeah. And if you have time, Moses, because we need to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Look, at the end of the day, right, we have to have infrastructure models that work for the citizenry. And ultimately, the society, if it's properly managed, right, and if it is not managed in a way that creates a great deal of inequity, right, concentrating resources in a few pockets, what then happens is that wealth is distributed. There's a more prosperous society, right? People are not, the mass of the people are not impoverished, right? And when you have that, people can pay more for the services, right, that you're delivering to them. And so part of it is the governance arrangements that create prosperity across, or that distribute the resources of society more across the population that we're talking about than concentrating it in a few hands. So that's one. Second is that there are arrangements that you can undertake which have been used by this administration, by the way, this PPP arrangement. But the problem that we've had with the PPP arrangements in Lagos State is that there's been very limited transparency around them. And those arrangements can either be wealth creating or they can actually be wealth destroying, depending on the contractual arrangements and how they are set up. And if you don't have transparency and accountability around it, if it's not open, all of those things, by the way, should be in the public domain. Right? If there's nothing to hide, put it. They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Just put it out there. Let people see. Right? And ultimately, those arrangements can be set up in such a way that they're basically not favoring a small group and enriching them, but they are more set up to provide services to the people, and then give the partners, the private sector partners, a reasonable, not excessive return on their investment. And that way, we benefit, all of us benefit. It should also be said, by the way, that there are going to be areas where government will need to spend money on behalf of the citizens, social areas.
Right. So, you know what, Mr. Doherty, the phone lines are buzzing. We have a lot of questions coming through on social media, but there's only so much time that we can spend discussing this on the show. So maybe you would be interested in coming back here sometime and speaking to us again closer to the election. We want to say thank you very much for your time spent with us this morning. Our guest is the candidate of the ADC, Mr. Funsho Doherty, who's running for office of the governor of Lagos State. If people want to interact with your campaigns, how can they reach you? If they have questions to ask, all of that.
Our contact details are on our website, www.funshodoherty.org, and they can send us emails. They can reach out to us by phone.
All right. Thank you very much. The news at 8 is up next. Stay with us. Good morning.
This is